Good afternoon. This is a real audience, not a virtual audience. Let's try that again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. That was not a rhetorical greeting. It was a real greeting. Because today the topic is the knowledge and practice of well-being. And it is organized by and sponsored by the Positive Psychology Center here at the University of Pennsylvania. So I want to extend to you a very warm welcome, emphasis on warm, and to let you know that one of the key topics in well-being is resilience. And so you've all shown resilience coming out today on weather that one wouldn't necessarily expect on March 20th in Philadelphia. So we are delighted to welcome you here, in part because, does anybody know what the connection is between today and happiness? Anybody know? It is the International Day of Happiness today. So happy Happiness Day. This was declared, the International Day of Happiness was declared by the United Nations some years ago. And so every year, March 20th is the International Day of Happiness. And so it's especially fitting that we would meet together today. And when you think about happiness, you might kind of be a little skeptical about what a day of happiness might be. Does that mean that we trade smiley face emoticons with each other? Does that mean we pretend that nothing bad is happening in the world and just grin at each other all day long? Well, it turns out that happiness is a much more serious business than that. Sometimes we talk about happiness, sometimes we talk about well-being or flourishing or wellness. We are basically going to use those terms interchangeably here today. Happiness, though, can mean several different things. So I have a 7-year-old, my wife Susie is here, we have a 7-year-old son, and if we ask him what happiness is, can you guess what he would say? Ice cream, cookies, playing video games very late at night. If you ask Susie and me what our hope for our son Liam is, it's that we hope he will be happy in his life. Does that mean that we hope he will have lots of ice cream and cookies and late night video game sessions? Well, we hope his life has some of that in it, but beyond that, we hope that he will flourish. We hope that he will find his own unique strengths and be able to bring those to bear in the cultural context in which he finds himself to be part of something larger than he is. So happiness can mean both of those things. Today, we're going to tend to mean more that broader sense of flourishing. And so we can define what happiness is, and we can measure it. How can we measure something that's so personal, so inward in our lives? Well, there's a variety of ways of doing it. The standard ways that psychologists measure psychological states, of course, in terms of questionnaires, but also we can measure it physiologically. There are physiological changes that happen in the body. I don't need to tell you. When you're super stressed in a negative kind of way, or when you're super excited in a positive and joyful kind of way. There are also ways of conducting measurements via data analysis. So if we look at what happens on social media, there are specific ways in which people use language that are connected to and tell us a lot of information about their well-being states. So there are a lot of different ways of measuring happiness. And happily, there are a lot of different ways of cultivating it. So studies have been done to see how individual activities or so-called interventions or clusters of interventions, specific programs, can actually help people to flourish in their lives. So at the Positive Psychology Center, and by the way, I encourage you to check out our website for more resources if you haven't done so already. So that's www.positivepsychology.org. And the Positive Psychology Center here at the University of Pennsylvania was founded in 2003 by Martin Seligman. And Martin Seligman is the founder of the field of positive psychology. And so at the Positive Psychology Center, we're engaged in a variety of activities, a few of which we'll tell you about today. And we plan to do it in a very interactive way. So it won't just be me or the other speakers yammering at you for the next hour and a half. That's not very conducive to well-being after all. But we'll do it in an interactive way. So some of the research that we're involved with is positive psychology research of all sorts, as you can imagine. The World Wellbeing Project is a project that specifically uses data science, big data, to look at well-being in the United States and around the world. How many of you have heard of the word grit connected to psychological research? Angela Duckworth, passionate perseverance toward long-term goals. And And so much of that research was done at the Positive Psychology Center. And finally, I should have introduced myself at the beginning, so I'll do that now. I am James Pawelski. I'm Professor of Practice and Director of Education at the Positive Psychology Center. And I am not a psychologist. I am a philosopher. So philosophers can kind of get in any which way, and yeah, we can make a lot of philosophical jokes. How many of you actually have friends who are philosophers? Okay, a couple of you do. Very good. All right. And so as a philosopher, I've been really excited about the work in positive psychology and the social science of well-being, and helped to be involved in it and helped to lead it over the last few years. But I've also been concerned because there aren't more people like me, more philosophers or more people in the arts engaged in the strategic study and cultivation of well-being. And so I'm very fortunate to have received a grant from the Templeton Religion Trust, a $2.5 million 3-year grant to look at the well-being effects of engagement in the arts and humanities. Some of the education and training that we do in the Positive Psychology Center, what brought me to Penn was the creation of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. This was the first degree program in the field of positive psychology. And Marty Seligman invited me to come to Penn, goodness, 13, 14 years ago to help develop the program, and I continue to direct and teach in it. We also have a Coursera specialization in positive psychology. We do resiliency training programs of everything from folks in the military to folks in professional sports. And we just have a Department of Justice grant now to train police officers in resilience. And then finally, I just mentioned positive education. So this is where we focus on thinking specifically about K through 12, but also university education, where we focus on the academics, but then also life skills. So it's also about character and well-being. And we find that character and well-being is an important end in itself of education, and it also helps students to perform better on standardized tests. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things we do at the Positive Psychology Center. Okay, so far so good? Nobody looks to be asleep yet, but just in case, let's do something a little interactive here. I mentioned to you that I'm a philosopher, so this is, what's this statue called? The Thinker. So I want to invite you to join me in a thought experiment. Would you be willing to do that? Not just watch me do that, but actually do it with me. Otherwise, it'll be very boring. It'll be interesting for me, but boring for you to watch me sit up here and think, and I'm not going to take my clothes off. So, so here we go. You guys ready?
Yes.
I'm not convinced. You guys ready to do a thought experiment with me?
Yes.
I promise you it'll be fun. Okay, here we go. You are at a flea market here in Philadelphia, and you see a lamp that looks like a really interesting lamp, and you decide to buy it. You take it home and you clean it up, and as you rub it, out pops a genie, because it's a magic lamp. And the genie says, I have been waiting for you. I am so impressed by the work that you are doing. You're working so hard. You're such a good soul. This genie knows you very well. And the genie says, I am so impressed with you that I'm going to transform you into a superhero. Now, the genie further says, the first decision you have to make as a superhero is what color you want to have your cape to be. This is a very important question for superheroes. So the genie says you've got two and only two choices. On the one hand, you could choose a red cape. And if you choose a red cape, you will have the power to fight against the things in the world that we don't want. Things like poverty, injustice, violence, and hunger. On the other hand, you could choose a green cape. And if you choose a green cape, you will have the power to help good things to grow. Love, harmony, understanding, justice. Okay, so on that choice, the genie is waiting. How many of you honestly would say, you know what, I'd take the red cape? Let me see your hands. Raise them up high. Red cape, excellent, great, okay, very good. How many of you would say, I would prefer the green cape? Let me see your hands. I don't know if the genie has enough green capes, but let's see. Okay. See, you are that much in tune with this genie and the question. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just take 1 minute to turn to your neighbor, tell them which color cape you would choose and why, just very quickly. Go for it.
Well, I don't know if there's I just goes back and forth between the two. I don't know which one. Another big check.
Okay, very good. Let's see what you guys, excellent. Let's see what you guys came up with. Let's hear from one person who would choose the red cape. Why would you choose the red cape? Yes, ma'am.
Basically, I feel like the red cape needs more courage for someone, and definitely it seems much harder than the green one. So that's basically. Yeah.
And you're up for a challenge.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. So look, I mean, if you look at comic books, almost all the superheroes have red capes, right? Because they're going around doing really meaningful things, and they're hard things. They're stopping crime and all kinds of awful things. Okay, great. Somebody who would choose the green cape. Why would you choose the green cape? Yes.
I thought you said that you were going to be teaching good or and promoting good, and
Yep.
I thought that maybe just fighting doesn't promote good.
Excellent point. So if all you do, so which one of these is actually the correct answer? So the point of the thought experiment isn't to say that one is right and the other is wrong. The point is to say that they're different, right? So if I choose the red cape, and I'm a red cape superhero, then what will I be looking for? Problems, right? Bad things. Will I find them? Alas, yes. And I can have a very meaningful life fighting against those things and helping to resolve those problems. If, on the other hand, I'm a green cape superhero, what will I be looking for? Opportunities, right? Good things that might happen. Will I find them? There are lots of opportunities in our world, and I can have a very meaningful life helping to realize those opportunities, right? So these are different. And what this allows me to do is to tell you what I think is the fundamental principle of positive psychology. The fundamental principle of positive psychology, in very, very technical terms, is you can't flourish without a green cape. So if all you do is put out the fires, try to solve the problems, then that's not the same thing as building up the things that we do want and helping to realize the opportunities. Does that make sense? This is because, oddly, well-being is not the same thing as the absence of ill-being. Well-being is not the same thing as the absence of ill-being. Think about this in physical health terms. You go to the doctor. The doctor gives you all the tests she knows, and they all come back negative. And she says to you, you are disease-free. Does that mean you're healthy? Not necessarily. You might be engaged in some behaviors which haven't yet resulted in disease, but might soon. Now, theoretically, I know this doesn't apply to any of you here, but some people don't get enough sleep, for example, or enough exercise, or eat enough green leafy vegetables, right? So you may be on the way to illness even though you haven't gotten there yet. So well-being is not the same thing as the absence of ill-being. You can't flourish without a green cape. How about this question, though? Can you flourish without a red cape? How many people would say you can? All you need is a green cape and you're good. How many people would say you actually do need a red cape also to flourish? You know what? I would agree with you. And in support of this position, I'm going to invite the Super Bowl champion Eagles to make my point. What does it take to win the Super Bowl? You have to have a great green cape offense, and you have to have a great red cape defense. If you've got one or the other, that isn't enough, right? You've got to have both to be able to succeed on the gridiron and in life. So what are the results of our thought experiment? Well, the red cape, the green cape, clearly what we need is a reversible cape. A cape that's red on one side and green on the other. And it turns out that we don't need a genie to offer this to us, right? Our genes have already done it. We have the capacity to avoid the things that we don't want and to approach the things that we do want. The challenge is that most of us, I would say, wind up underusing the green side because our brains have evolved to be very sensitive to threat. If we have a problem, we typically know it because problems scream at us, whereas opportunities whisper. This is known in psychology as the negativity bias. We're very sensitive to threat, in part because if we're not, we won't live till tomorrow. So it's really important to know when a saber-toothed tiger is about to attack. But any of you seen a saber-toothed tiger recently? So our brains are still looking for saber-toothed tigers even though they're not really around. So the kinds of threats that our brain evolved to warn us to are much less common than they were when our brains were evolving. So again, we tend to underuse the green side of the cape. And so it's very important. Now you see why I love positive psychology. I get to fulfill my fantasies of being a superhero. So it's important to have access to the red side of the cape. Absolutely. There are times when, in the face of injustice, bullies on the playground, all those kinds of things, you need to be able to say, no, this is not okay. The challenge, though, is that we also need to be able to recognize opportunities, even when they don't come and hit us in the face like problems do. And so positive psychology is a field that says, let's use the considerable resources of empirical psychology to try to understand how we can use the green side of our cape more effectively and more frequently, right? So, what we'd like to do in the time that we have together today is to talk with you about various ways in which we can think about the balanced use of our capacities as human beings. Certainly not avoiding using the red side of the cape when we need to, but learning how to use the green side even more, in part because if we can use the green side more effectively, that may give the red side of the cape less to do. Make sense? Any thoughts or questions before we move on to the next exploration of this? You guys on board? Excellent, great. I was a little worried when I walked in and I saw the chairs were red. So, my goodness, what are we going to do? But you guys are doing great. Okay, good. So let me introduce our next speaker. I am just delighted to be able to welcome somebody here who is a leader in mindfulness meditation. Have any of you had a practice in mindfulness or meditation? Okay, great. Some of you have. I have learned from this speaker and it has changed my life. So we're really delighted to have someone here who is the founder of the Penn program for mindfulness. He is a clinical associate professor in the medical school here at the University of Pennsylvania. And he also is the recipient of the Provost Distinguished Teaching Award. And in 2016, he was awarded, he received an award for distinguished contribution in behavioral medicine from the American College of Physicians. Since 1992, he and his colleagues have trained over 20,000 people in mindfulness-based stress management methods. So please join me in welcoming our very own Michael Bain. Thank you. I forgot my cape.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
Well, that's quite a welcome and quite a great place for me to start. Thank you for braving the elements today. I was asked to talk about mindfulness, and I teach a full semester course on mindfulness at Penn. It's offered through the School of Medicine, which is my home base. And the only catch was I was told that I had 15 minutes. So I'm going to get right to the point. I'm going to give you not just the essence, but the quintessence. I'm going to tell you the secret. I'm going to tell you why everybody is nuts about mindfulness. Now, is there anybody in here who's nuts about mindfulness? You can come out of the closet now, come on. It's okay. Nobody. Oh, so okay, so you can take a nap or put your feet up and relax. But for everybody else, like, I think this is totally mystifying. What's going on with this? I've been teaching mindfulness since 1981, when I was authorized in a traditional lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. And my career path at that time was to be a monk. But I didn't like the capes that they had. But listen, I've been doing it at Penn. I've been at Penn since then. That's when I finished medical school here. So my whole career has been here. And frankly, almost all of that time, I've been a complete weirdo. Like, I was a good doctor. I'm a primary care doctor, so I was tolerated. But people looked at this other thing and said, "What are you doing with yourself?" But then, suddenly, it became cool. I had to change my identity. Why did this happen? I'll give you 2 reasons. This slide is a graph. Oh, whoops. That slide is not a graph. I was just saying that people who do mindfulness are weird. So I was making my point. That's not my dog. Don't worry. This is the graph I was looking for. To get this all in 15 minutes, I had to move things around a little bit. This is a graph of citations in the National Library of Medicine that index mindfulness. And you can see that it's an exponential curve. So that at this rate, in not very long, if you're a mathematician, you know that the entire universe would be nothing but citations of mindfulness. It can't happen. I don't know. It's still happening. We'll see. But even that, although that's compelling and I teach a whole class on that research, I'm very interested in it. I'd love to share it with you. And if you have, a few weeks, we'll settle down and put our heads together because there's a lot there. But that's not why it's so popular. This is why it's so popular. This is a slide for the University of Pennsylvania. How many of you are students here? Yeah. So does that look familiar? Is that what it feels like? It's really hard. And your professors feel the same way, They just kind of keep it under wraps a little bit. It's hard. We're so busy. There's so much to do. How do we manage that? So life is inherently stressful. There's always a saber-toothed tiger of one sort or another hiding behind a corner. And mindfulness is a way of bringing all of your attention into the present moment, of being fully present. So does that make sense to you? Why would you choose to bring all your attention right into exactly the moment when you're having an awful time? The most stressful moment, is it going to help you to pay attention to it? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds crazy. It sounds like you'd want to get right out of there as fast as you can. So here's the deal. Here's my image that walks you through how this works. You're at the peak of your game, on the top of the world. You climbed all the way up, and the view is gorgeous, and something happens, which I represent by that yellow arrow, which has 2 salient qualities. 1, it's really sharp, and 2, it's coming right at you. And when it hits, it's going to hurt. Oh. So when something like that happens, when it's a saber-toothed tiger, whatever it is, no matter how beautiful the view is, no matter how much you've accomplished, all of your attention is drawn to that point. And this is what Dr. Pawelski said. Like, you are built to not be able to look away from that. When that saber-toothed tiger is chasing you down the mountain valley, you are not capable of stopping and looking down and saying, "Oh, wow, a 4-leaf clover. Whoa." Not happening. And when you find yourself faced with something sharp and fast that's going to hurt, what happens from you is that you react. You have a big reaction. There's a lot of energy behind it. I could talk about the biology, but you know it from the inside, so I don't have to. Everything is activated. Everything intensifies. You're preparing to fight, to swing the biggest club that you can find at the head of that saber-toothed tiger and crush its skull, which is what you should do. But it's a very poor strategy when it's a professor who didn't extend your deadline for the paper, or the police officer who pulled you over for driving too fast. Bad idea. So we have to put a lid on it, and we contract around it and suppress. And that inner contraction, that suppression, is what we feel is stress. Trying to contain all that energy that we can't discharge. And unfortunately for us, even when the event and the reaction is over, we can still feel it. Our bodies are still a little bit tight. Yours probably is right now. Just check your shoulders. Are they pulled up a little bit more than they have to be? Probably, right? And unfortunately, even more, this contraction expands with repeated episodes over and over again, and we develop kind of like a shield of armor or maybe a scar around the places where we're vulnerable. So we feel less, we connect less. But the way that it really happens in real life, it looks more like this. It's over so fast, we don't even see it coming. We just have to pick up the pieces. Mindfulness slows this down so that there's something that we learn to place in between this place of impact that we'll call attention. And that attention becomes portable. So when we practice mindfulness, which is a way of strengthening attention, with practice it comes with us. So that sounds good, or maybe that sounds good. Anyway, that's how I'd explain it. There's that rub though. What do these two pictures have in common? Any ideas? What do you think? Pretty people, beautiful, beautiful. Eyes closed, looking blissful. What do you think they just did? Are we even allowed to talk about that here? I don't know. They're both wearing, I don't know, I wouldn't even dare to say. Well, you know, the thing that these two pictures have in common, if you ask me, is that they are ridiculous. Those of you who have practiced mindfulness meditation, many of you raised your hand. Have any of you had that experience yet? Let me know, because I want to have a little chat with you. I want to find what you were doing. The actual experience of mindfulness looks more like that, right? The people who are laughing are the people who have tried it, watching your brain, your mind bounce around inside your skull. I want you to think about mindfulness from a completely different perspective. Mindfulness is a way of training a capacity. When you practice mindfulness, the capacity that you're training is your attention. And just like what you do with your biceps, when you want to strengthen it, you use your biceps, you ask it to do work against the resistance of gravity. When you practice mindfulness, you focus attention against the resistance of boredom and distractedness and irritation. You actually use that capacity up until it's exhausted, until you almost can't use it anymore. And that's how it is strengthened. This is a graph. Let's just forget about the graph on the right. The bars on the left are results from our class at Penn of medical, and this is nursing students also, who took our program, Medicine 589, Mindfulness and Mind-Body Medicine. And it is their performance on a test that measures attention called the Attention Network Test. The people who took the class, the change in their scores is on the left. The people who didn't, a control group of medical and graduate students on the right. It's, without talking about the details of the test, it's a huge difference. We were surprised at that. It helps you to resist the distraction. It helps your attention to stay focused. I'm not going to talk about how this research was done. It improves your working memory, which is probably, I mean, one of the best quick and dirty surrogate measures that we have of general intelligence overall, working memory capacity. It improves your scores on tests. This slide is just to remind me to tell you that a group of university students who practiced mindfulness every day for a very short period of time, for just 2 weeks, had a 20% improvement in their scores on the verbal part of the graduate record exam. 20%. Do you know how much you have to study to do that? It's a really big difference. How does it work? This is a picture of my brain, and I don't want to talk about regional brain function. I'm just making the point that when you do anything with your brain, functions in regions, different parts of the brain changes, and when you focus attention, like what you do with mindfulness, it's a very, very specific series of regional brain function changes that you identify. The prefrontal cortex, which is where your working memory is, it's also what you use to make decisions, sort of a lot of your higher cognitive capacities are there. Changes in the amygdala, which is the area that we believe is involved in the generation of panic and rage. In just 8 weeks of practice, the gray matter density in that area decreases. It becomes much less active. When you keep practicing mindfulness, when you do this over and over again, neurons that fire together then wire together. So there are increased synaptic connections, and we see structural brain changes in people who practice mindfulness. This one study, which was the first study that reported this, looked at the prefrontal cortex, this area here. And this is also the insula, which is an area that's important for the sensation of visceral events, interoceptive sensation it's called, and also an area that helps to integrate emotion and cognition. So this ability to be in the present moment that you're training your brain to do is probably the most important thing that you have in life. It helps you to listen better because we're all so distracted. You know, we look like we're listening while we're really planning what we're going to say next. And we're so good at it that nobody even knows. The people who we see the most are the people who we attend to the least. You don't have to listen to what your significant other says because you've already heard them say it before. But something doesn't happen when we experience others that way. We did a study that looked at brain function in people practicing mindfulness and a group of Carmelite nuns who were practicing prayer. And what we found is that the regional brain changes were almost exactly the same. Almost exactly the same. There was one difference. The nuns had activation in the area of the brain that processes language, and the meditators didn't. And that's because the nuns were reciting a verbal prayer. So is meditation praying, or is praying meditation, or does it even make sense to try to make a distinction? So, I mean, this got a lot of press. I had like the weirdest emails and phone calls for about 2 weeks that I ever got, and then everybody forgot about it. So I run this mindfulness-based stress reduction program at Penn. It's exquisitely and completely secular. We don't talk about spirituality really at all. I don't know if I'm allowed to. And yet year after year, I kept finding that people would come out of that and saying, you know, that was great. I'm not stressed anymore. But what I really found is that the world is a more beautiful place than I ever thought. What I really found is that I'm connecting with the people who I live with more. What I really found is that my heart is opening. They were saying things that sounded like what people say when they have a spiritual experience. So I gave 500 consecutive people in that program a measure of non-religious spirituality, which was actually developed for people with cancer, but it's the best survey of its type that we have. And the people who took the course had a huge increase in this measure of non-religious spirituality in just 8 weeks. How do I put this together for you? Well, here's what I'd say. This is my paradigm sort of for how mindfulness helps us to buffer stress. It allows us to separate from the stressful event, to see it as an event instead of inhabiting it. It creates a kind of a space around us. Disidentification with the event is one thing that people call it. Reperceiving is another word that people in psychology have used. I'm also not a psychologist, but I'm just going to call it a kind of a space. And I said that that space was representative of, or was an icon for, attention. And I couldn't really have said something more boring. That's like totally boring. Do you care about your attention all that much, really? Well, I want to suggest that it may be the single most important thing that you have in your entire life. That your attention isn't some abstract cognitive capacity. Your attention is the doorway through which you have a life at all. Everything that you learn comes in through your attention repeatedly in order for it to be learned. everything that you ever meet in your life that's beautiful will be known through your attention or will be there and remain unnoticed because your attention was distracted or fragmented or not bright. Everybody who you love, those are my two sons, everybody who you, they're bigger than that now, who you love, you will meet in that place where the present moment actually happens. If you have a mission or a calling in life, you will find it because of this quality of attention that you used to meet it with. Everything. The earth, the sky, and all of its creatures, your own human heart, vulnerable and strong and beating, is felt and sensed and known and held through your attention. And so, if you can strengthen that, you're not strengthening your ability to take a test, you're strengthening your ability to have a life that matters and to connect with the people who you love and to see what's really in the world, both its beauty and its pathos. And I don't think that anything is more important than that, and I don't think that anything is more helpful for our flourishing. So let that circle be really big. Invite it in. So that's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was fantastic. Mindfulness guy who's also funny, like, isn't that great? Michael has just recently joined us at the Positive Psychology Center, and he will begin having a series of mindfulness sessions. And so if you're interested in joining us, you're more than welcome to do so. The first one will be on Thursday, weather permitting. The first one will be on Thursday at noon at the Positive Psychology Center, which is on the second floor at 3701 Market. 3701 Market, second floor, Thursday at noon. How many of you find yourselves just naturally and habitually, before you go to sleep, your attention just naturally drifts to all the wonderful things that happened that day? How you got way more done than you thought you were going to. How so many people over the course of the day, especially on social media, were just so richly supportive of you and your goals. If you're like me, the attention naturally seems to go elsewhere. How could this day possibly be done? When my work isn't, I am further behind at the end of the day than I was at the beginning of the day, and I was going to work so hard today. And what did she mean when she said blah, 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 blah? I thought she was my friend. What's going on? So one of the key things about the mind is that it tends to focus on things, again, that are threats or also things that aren't finished. This is called the Zeigarnik effect in psychology. Things that aren't finished grab our attention for good reasons many times. But oftentimes we're focused so much on that that we don't notice the things that we did get done. And it's important to be able not to, as a way of keeping from feeling overwhelmed and too hard on ourselves, if we can acknowledge what we're already doing well, that can help us stay motivated and have the energy to continue. So we're now going to, I'm going to invite you to focus on something in your life, a specific time when you did use the green side of your cape and you used it effectively. And we'll share that story with each other. And then we'll have a brief presentation on positive relationships. And then we'll have a brief presentation from the creators of the Penn program for flourishing. And then at the end, we're going to work together to think about ways in which we can use the green side of our capes more effectively in our individual and collective lives here at Penn to help support us moving toward well-being. Does that sound good? Great. So what I'd like to do is to invite you to think about a specific time, maybe as a student, if you're a student, or maybe in your role, whatever your role is here at Penn or in the community. Think about a specific time when you used the green side of your cape. When you saw something that might be done on the well-being side, an opportunity, and you didn't just kind of sit back and let it go by. You were actually proactive and did something about it. It doesn't have to be the perfect time. Just one example is good. How many of you already have something in mind along those lines that you could? Okay, Great. So I'll talk for 30 more seconds so you can continue to think. What's a time when you use the green side of your cape? That is to say, you move towards the things that we do want in life, either for yourself or in a relationship or in some kind of community, and things worked out well. And so what we're going to invite you to do is to share this with a neighbor. We'll call these green cape stories. And so there'll be two roles here. The first role is as the speaker. Think of a time when you successfully used the green side of your cape. Share what happened and what you did. What you did to make it happen. Now this might seem a little awkward at first because I'm not supposed to talk to a stranger about what good I did. Why not? Why not? If that's really truly what happened, why shouldn't we be able to share that in a supportive environment? Okay, we'll take 2 minutes for each person. So the first person will share, and then the listener role. Now this is probably the harder role because you want to be a good listener. That means not interrupting with your own stories yet. Being a good listener, focusing on what the other person is saying. When the story is finished, help the speaker to savor it. Then tell the speaker what strengths you heard in the story. And for time purposes, we'll keep this pretty short, just 1 minute, okay? So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to find one other person to buddy up with along these lines. And when it's been 3 minutes, I'll give you a signal so that you can switch to make sure that the other person has time to tell their story as well. Okay, sound good? All right, find a buddy and share your green cape stories. Go for it. Excellent. Very, very good. Okay, let's come back together. I am so excellent. Great to hear. I am so very sorry to interrupt you. You guys were in the middle of a great conversation, I know. It's such a great sound to be in a room where people are sharing good things with each other and being supported by the other person. How do you guys feel? That feel pretty good? Yeah. So why don't we do this more often? Let me rephrase that. Let's do this more often, right? So I encourage you to specifically focus on, it was just 5 minutes, 6 minutes that we took to listen to someone else and to tell someone else about something good that happened to them. Excellent. Okay, so now I'm going to invite a very special person to me to come and join me. And that is my wife, Susie, who's still sharing her story, I think. So I am not an alum from the University of Pennsylvania, so I did the next best thing I could, and I married one. So Susie is an alum, and she is a graduate of the master's program in applied positive psychology and a freelance writer. And so we are going to talk with you just very briefly about a project that we've been involved with, Romance and Research, Can Science Help Us Be Happy Together?
So we're talking about relationships because relationships are really easy, right? For any of you in a romantic relationship, you just meet your prince or Princess Charming and you fall madly in love and they whisk you off your feet and maybe you get married or you're in a committed relationship and you live happily ever after, right? That's how it happens. Well, maybe not. In fairy tales, it does, and that's kind of why the fairy tales end there, but I think the real story begins after the story ends, but nobody talks about it. Unfortunately, too, in pop culture, we hear that just happily ever after just happens, right? And there's so much focus today on getting together. All those apps, I think I'm a little old for that, but I hear you swipe right and left and all this focus on trying to get together, right? As opposed to how to be together and be happy together and stay together. I think there's much more attention on looking for the partner. But once you're together, not so much attention. And research shows that unlike in the movies and popular culture and fairy tale books, happily ever after doesn't just happen, that happy couples practice healthy habits that lead to long-term love.
So we're going to be talking with you specifically about romantic relationships today, but the principles that we're sharing with you really hold across all kinds of human relationships, romantic and non-romantic. But in the category of romantic relationships, there's so much pressure to find your soulmate. Anybody ever heard that? You got to find your soulmate. Otherwise, it's just not going to... Look, if soulmate refers to somebody that you're deeply connected to. We have nothing against soulmates. But if soulmate is a term for somebody who just kind of magically, mysteriously, in some kind of fated way appears out of nowhere and makes your life magical, then we think that's actually not a healthy way of thinking about relationships for 3 reasons. One, that can make it seem like there's nothing for you to do while you're waiting, right? So I'm just waiting around for my soulmate, as opposed to working on the skills and habits that we can engage in to help us become better at relationships. Secondly, if we think that this person we found is our soulmate, then we may become so dependent on that other person that we can't have a healthy relationship. And research indicates that it's not dependence nor independence that makes great relationships, but a kind of interdependence, right? And so the third reason why this kind of glorified notion of soulmate can be problematic is because this can be unsustainable. If I'm reliant on Susie to complete me in some way, she's she's my connection to happiness and well-being, that doesn't give her room to be herself. So she has to stay what I need, and I have to stay what she needs, and that isn't a very good way to live one's life.
Yes, it's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure on everybody, right? So that makes me think of Aristotle, of course. I'm sure you were thinking the same thing. I told you I was a philosopher, so you should have expected this. So look, Aristotle, it turns out you might not think of him as the go-to person when you're talking about romantic relationships, but he had some really interesting things to say about human relationships.
And we talked about them on our honeymoon.
We talked about them on our honeymoon. So now you know why I love Susie so much. She tolerates my, anyway. So Aristotle said we love 3 things as human beings. We love what is useful, we love what is pleasurable, and we love what is good. And he says we have relationships based on these things, which makes sense, right? We all have friendships of usefulness. They might be people we study together with, or people that we're planning to maybe start a company together with at some point in the future. It's mutually beneficial to have that relationship. We also have friendships of pleasure, people that it's just fun to hang out with on the weekend because they're just a lot of just riotously funny or whatever it is, right? And Aristotle says there's nothing wrong with these kinds of relationships. But he says there's a third kind of relationship that's even deeper, and that is a relationship of virtue, where you see the good in the other person, and that's what attracts you. You see the good in their character. And Aristotle says that can actually inspire us to want to become better people ourselves. And you think we were kidding, but we actually were talking about this on our honeymoon. And Susie had an interesting take on it. So, Susie.
So on our honeymoon, talking about Aristotle, because that's what one does on their honeymoon, especially if you're married to a Penn philosopher. I think we had a few of those little drinks, though, with the umbrellas. So we were like, having some pleasure as well.
And we should also mention that about 9 months later, our son was born. So we weren't just talking about Aristotle.
Okay. But all the books James brought, I think he brought the original Nicomachean Ethics. His suitcase was so heavy. Oh, my goodness. 25 books in his bag. But seriously, we were talking about Aristotle, and I like him too. And I said to James, why did Aristotle have to limit this notion just to platonic friendships? What if we took his notion and we upped it a notch and we applied it to our marriage? So instead of just being lovers, we became Aristotelian lovers, and we really focused on helping one another become better individuals and better together as a couple. So identifying our strengths and each other's and helping each other grow those strengths. And he said, I love it. So we kind of made it a marital mission statement for our marriage. And then also it's the backbone of a book we recently wrote together on applying positive psychology to relationships.
So with this framework, where we're not focused so much on what we can get out of a relationship, usefulness or pleasure, but what we can put into it in terms of helping support our partner in their good character and being inspired ourselves to want to be better people, we think this is a much healthier framing for relationships than we oftentimes think about from the popular media and fairy tales and so forth. So it takes work. And so we like to think of this as visiting the relationship gym. It's working out. And how do we work out? Well, when you go to the gym, you want to listen to the trainer who can tell you how to direct your efforts in helpful ways. And so when we're in the relationship gym, we have a whole science, positive psychology, that can help direct our efforts in ways that can be particularly useful. Today, we just have time to tell you about one exercise or one activity that has been really cool for us, and we would like to recommend it to you. So, Susie, take it away.
Okay, so in positive psychology, researchers have come up with 24 strengths that have been valued across time and cultures. Qualities like creativity, kindness, love, leadership, love of learning. And the good news is we all have these strengths, and we have them in different configurations. If you're curious to find out what your top 5 strengths are, commonly referred to as your signature strengths, you could take the free VIA survey. We have a link to that on our website, which is buildhappytogether.com. So once you find out what your top 5 strengths are, we thought, what if couples practice going on strengths dates, okay? So we all go on dates, and you hear a lot, well, I don't like to do this, or I don't like to do that, and partners take turn planning dates. Well, that's kind of nice, but the bad news is you kind of begrudgingly might be going to a movie or a rock concert that you don't enjoy when it's your partner's turn to plan the date. So instead of taking turns just planning regular dates that are extrinsically motivated, strengths dates focus on things that you both enjoy. They're intrinsically motivated because what you do, you pick one of your top strengths. So for me, it might be zest. And you pick one of your partners. So for James, love of learning. I don't know if he has a slide up.
Yep.
Oh, he does. Okay, so what we did with my zest and his love of learning, we rented Segways and we took a tour of the historical part of Old City, the neighborhood we live nearby. And at the end of the day, my sense of adventure was satisfied, and James's love of learning, I don't know about satisfied because he really loves to learn as a philosopher, but at least it was peaked. And research shows when we're using our strengths every day, it's associated with greater well-being. And when couples help facilitate strengths use in their partner, research shows they have better relational satisfaction, heightened joy, and better sexual satisfaction.
Now
So-
we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you might want to check out a strengths date. And also when we're using our strengths, becoming a better person, as James mentioned with Aristotle's, third level of friendships or relationships, when you feel like a better person and you feel like virtue in action, it also increases physiological changes. We could have the doctor get up here talking about it, but when you see virtue in action and someone being a good person, your heart actually expands and there's physiological changes going on. So you want to reach out and connect, which is exactly what you should be doing if you're in a relationship.
Excellent. So try it out for yourselves. If you're in a romantic relationship, I suggest, try out a strengths date of your own. If you'd like to try this with a buddy, a friend, a family member, that works too. You can find out what your mutual strengths are and create an afternoon where you're having a great time together. Okay, that's as much time as we have for now, but as Susie mentioned, we've just written a book, Happy Together, Using the Science of Positive Psychology to Build Love That Lasts. So there's a lot more information in that book. Or you can check out our website, buildhappytogether.com. That contains, among other things, the link that Susie mentioned to find what your signature strengths are. Great. Thank you, Susie. Well done.
Thank you. It was fun.
So next we're going to turn to a couple of presenters who have graduated from the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program, are currently assistant instructors in that program, and have created a very special program of their own, the Penn Program for Flourishing. So I'll let them tell you a little bit more about it if you will join me in welcoming Faisal Khan and Laura Taylor.
Hello everyone, it's a delight to be here. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Faisal Khan. Penn is very near and dear to my heart. I'm actually an alum of 3 schools here, Penn Engineering, Wharton, and most recently with the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology from the School of Liberal and Professional Studies. I run my own practice called One Extraordinary Life, specializing in executive coaching and management consulting in well-being. And I'm also the founder of the Penn Program of Flourishing, which I run with my esteemed colleague here, Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Taylor. I'm also a graduate of math, and I'm thrilled to be a co-creator with Faisal here on the Penn Program for Flourishing. My background is actually in theater, musical theater, and arts education for the last 15 years prior to coming to Penn. and I run Acting Strengths, which is a workshop cultivating resilience in performing artists, in addition to this work.
Great. And so you heard a little bit about positive psychology and the application to the self, concepts related to positive psychology, mindfulness, how it might exist with happy couples, red cape, green cape, etc. So Laura and I set about, okay, how could we apply positive psychology in our community here at Penn? And so hence we started the Penn Program for Flourishing, which our motto for the program is to help students thrive in student life and beyond. And so it's an 8-week program. We run it on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8:30. It's a voluntary program where people can, students from all schools can come and attend. And the focus is actually on the application of positive psychology. We made a deliberate decision for it not to be didactic, not to be talking about the theory behind it, but just spending about 30 minutes at max around the theory and the didactic nature of the lectures, and then spending the bulk of the time, close to an hour, on techniques and tools, just like the strength state that you heard over here. But what techniques and tools can we succinctly teach within the classroom so that students can apply them there and then go and teach them outside?
Yeah, absolutely. We feel that the application is pertinent because the benefits that you can gather from positive psychology research happen when they are in practice, right? We don't get benefits from a strength state if we don't go on the strength state. Just knowing your strengths is really helpful, but it's not going to create that kind of power, passion, and engagement or intrinsic motivation that you heard them speak about if you're not engaging in the world. So our aim is to co-create a community with these students so that they can pick up practices and techniques so that they can begin to cultivate that flourishing in their own lives. One of the things we do to help them in this process is we've created professional mentorship alignment with fellow MAP graduates. We love engaging our community, and we think it's a wonderful opportunity to have an undergraduate student engaging with a professional who is either currently in the MAP program or an alumni of the MAP program. It gives them an opportunity to talk about personal questions that they may not have space for in the 90-minute session each week. And we are actually the first program of our kind on Penn's campus offering professional mentorship. So we think it's a real asset and virtue to our group. As we said, we're leveraging these evidence-based skills to help students thrive in their life and beyond, and we think it's a pretty great opportunity. But honestly, we could sit here and tell you all day what we think, and maybe that's not so helpful. So we wanted to give you an idea of what are the students saying. Here we go. You just have to hit that.
This year was my second time participating in the Penn Program for Flourishing.
The Penn Program for Flourishing taught me how to be north of neutral and look for the positives in my everyday life. It was a really great opportunity to detach from the daily stresses of college and to really take a step back, reflect on what was most important to me.
I've really enjoyed these sessions every week, and I've looked forward to them. I think it's really exciting because I don't think I've learned most of these, pretty much any of these concepts about positive psychology before in other aspects of my education. And I think I should have, and I think it's good I got that opportunity.
And I was like, wow, doesn't positive psychology sound good? So then I was like, wow, it also fits into my schedule. And even if it didn't, I would have cut some things out of my day for this. I could focus on a lot of things that I want, but I think my body and my mental health comes first. So this was something that I needed to do.
Even though starting this program, I was kind of in a pretty good place, place of mind. I still wanted to strengthen my knowledge of positive psychology, and knowing that I have this space to come to every week and learning about all these new things about myself and about other people have been really helpful, more meaningful, and I'm really thankful that I did. Thank you for this program. And honestly, it has been one of the best decisions I've made at Penn so far. And I think that should be offered everywhere as an opportunity. I really have not taken any other class or been in any other program similar to this at all. It's literally just a space that's built for students to just come in here and talk to each other and learn about positive psych. So it's really unique and really valuable.
I could say with 100% positivity that it's been the highlight of my week every week. Definitely makes my day every Tuesday. I'll definitely miss it. And I've learned so much about myself that I can apply to my everyday life going forward, and I'm really excited to go on, I guess, on my own with all these techniques that I've learned, and I'm really excited to continue my studies, hopefully in positive psychology.
I came to the program here 8 weeks ago, and every single day I sort of learned something about positive psychology that helped me get in one step way better. Speaking with a mentor every week, learning a lesson every week, I have been implementing a lot of the strategies currently in my life, and I do feel a little bit better, a little bit more healed, and a little bit more ready to go take on the world.
So that was just to give you a little bit of a snippet of what fulfills both Laura and I in spreading this message of positive psychology and creating a common language that people can relate to. I believe everyone in the world wants to succeed, wants to live a life of well-being and be happy in life. And so what if we created a community here at Penn where people became familiar with the language that enables that type of a connection with each other and with the community. And so the Penn Program for Flourishing's vision aligns quite nicely with the Penn Compact, which consists of three arms, if you will, first being inclusion.
So as we mentioned, the thing that differentiates our program is we're open to any student in any year in any school. There's no other program currently for undergraduates that has that kind of open registration process. Even in clubs, you may, as some students yourself, you may realize that sometimes there's a pretty intense application process that goes through that. Vetting, interviews, it can be quite competitive. And so we are striving to create a space on campus that tears down competitive walls and opens up a collaborative co-creation for well-being.
And the second one, we feel that's quite innovative in approach. As far as we know, it's the only program of its kind, certainly at Penn, but perhaps in the world, where this is a workshop-type format where people really learn the skills to thrive in life. The other innovative part of this is the alignment with the mentors. So if participants feel that an hour and a half isn't enough to learn the content and they want to go a little bit deeper, because they're aligned with experts in the field, graduates of the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program, they can practice and have those discussions with their mentors.
And finally,
yep.
We have impact. I hope you can tell that the reason we're bringing this out to your attention today is because we're trying to get the word out, right? We hope that we are continuing to create the impact that you have seen in the video for those students, and we want to be sure that this program is widely available as much as possible. We believe that you are here today because you are interested in the knowledge and practice of well-being here in your own community. So we are one effort, right? And there hopefully will be many, many more. We know there are many, many more, right? We're trying to get ways in which we can share and collaborate and move those forward so that we can create a space on campus. We hope you'll join us if you're interested. You can find us at the Penn Program for Flourishing at gmail.com. And now we want to invite you guys to help dream and collaborate with us on how to create a vision for well-being here in our community. So what we're going to do is a little activity. We've got 5 facilitators, so we're going to have 5 questions. We're going to spend the next few minutes, you're going to have about 10 minutes in a small group discussion. You're going to have 3 things that you need to do to get started. Not too challenging. You're going to choose a question from the next slide that you want to talk about. Then you're going to join the facilitator for that question as directed. And then you're just going to engage in a 10-minute conversation. What's going to happen at the end is we will report back out what insights and learnings and discoveries may have happened during that session so that we can take the best of those ideas and move them forward to various committees and places here on campus so that we can do our best to try and integrate these ideas in the community. So we have 5 questions that we've come up for today, and hopefully that you'll find that they are grounded in the themes that we've already been presenting. So the first, which will be here in the center, you can think of this as a map of where in the room the question will also be held, right? So here in the center, we're going to talk about collaboration. What opportunities for collaboration exist to support collective well-being? FASO will be handling that right here in this area. Then we're going to talk about community. What steps can Penn take to become a thriving community of well-being? And that will be here with James. Then we have relationships. How can we build positive relationships to support well-being? Susie is going to help us with that question. She'll be back in the corner with that flip chart. Strengths. How can we capitalize on our strengths to foster well-being? I'll be helping you out with that question. I'll be over in the back. And then, of course, mindfulness. How can the personal practice of mindfulness help create a culture of well-being? And Dr. Michael will be handling that right over here. So I invite you to take a moment, quickly get to that area of self-choice, and we'll dive right in for a small group conversation. When James alerts us, we'll report back out.
I know, I keep interrupting you. So what we're going to do,
so much. Thanks a lot.
what we're going to do is we're going to hear briefly. We're going to hear briefly from each group. It's the relationship coach. There's still time. They are tight already. I love it. So this is clearly just the beginning of our conversation, not the end of it. But I'm going to ask the facilitator for each group, just in about 30 seconds or a minute, to summarize what some of the ideas were that your group had. So we'll start with Faisal with collaboration. What opportunities for collaboration exist to support collective well-being?
So I think, quickly going through this, and please, my team, chime in if I miss something out. We took an inside-out approach. So collaboration between schools was our first bullet point, and our last bullet point was mechanisms and structures to collaborate with both internally as well as externally. There were things mentioned like using a reversible CAPE approach to address existing issues, for example, stress. And so the incentive behind wanting to collaborate, why collaborate, both internally and externally. Penn reaching out, so for example, we have initiatives where we currently reach out to schools, etc., but also having the ability and the forums for external parties to reach in. And so how can you take advantage of the synergies that might be developed there and then? Anything else that...
Great job, group. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. All right, so community, what steps can Penn take to become a thriving community of well-being? So ideas that we came up with in our group, maybe having positive psychology courses for faculty so that they know how to support students in the context of daily life. There are a lot of lonely, stressed, busy students. So maybe we could have a place, a location where you could go at any time of the day or night if you're feeling kind of lonely and you want to connect with other people. And you can go and connect authentically. Maybe have strengths dates or strengths afternoons or strengths events that you could do as part of the programming there. So virtue-based and self-directed leadership. So leadership isn't all just about I'm president of the largest organization on campus, but rather it's about giving and noticing the good in other people as well. Learning how to accept rejection. It's something we all have to figure out. Tools to build connection with others. Involvement by faculty and administration as mentors. And then finally, having more group activities. There's this program for students to take faculty out to lunch, so having that be used even more and more effectively. So thank you, team, for those great ideas. Now we're going to go to relationships. How can we build positive relationships to support well-being?
We could start conversations with something positive instead of the usual. We can try to focus on the positive by using the green cape instead of just always responding with the red cape. There's arguments and problems. Sometimes maybe just putting that down and starting proactively, introducing something new into the relationship. Character strengths we talked a little bit about here. Most people weren't familiar with the character strengths, so I'd love if everyone took the free character strengths test to find out the top strengths. Somebody mentioned writing things down sometimes works better with her partner because you get the emotionality out of it. We also talked about marching into Dr. Michael Bain's office for some mindfulness meditation. Maybe not literally, Michael, but meditating even a few minutes a day to, instead of responding when you're having problems. Somebody mentioned living in separate cities works for him with his partner. Might not be for everyone, but that could work if you're in communication. And really just practicing on using the green cape more in relationships than focusing on problems.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Great job, group. Next is strengths. How can we capitalize on our strengths to foster well-being?
So we started by trying to identify some of the strengths that are unique to the Penn community here. The group came up with a wonderful list. They talked about Penn's reputation worldwide as being a particular strength, the diversity and broad reach that happens both internally and externally to Penn, the inclusivity that it feels, and the academic inclusion came up. We had a parent who's bringing in a student as a freshman next year, and one of the things that attracted the student to the program is that they are able to sort of have some self-directed learning and be able to choose courses across schools. So that academic inclusion, the ability and the opportunities that come from that to be able to sort of self-direct and follow passion. Also a really welcoming environment people find when they're first coming in particular. The resources that they have as an institution, both as a research institution, but also because there are a variety of schools and areas. And we have an opportunity here to lead and create change. And I think there's a real strong sense of meaning for social responsibility to create that change. And so if that is from this group, a real strong source of meaning, how might we be able to leverage that collective source of meaning of Penn and the reputation itself to increase and foster well-being in our own community first, and then moving forward as a model for others. So we talked about action ideas also, maybe grassroots, starting with just having it widely available. Can we have conversations with clubs through housing, through freshman orientation perhaps, or other high impact points? And then also the idea of maybe graduate students reaching back down and using what they've learned to practice with the undergraduate community and cross-pollinating that.
Excellent. Great job, group. And last but not least, mindfulness. How can the personal practice of mindfulness help create a culture of well-being?
Yeah, it seems like a paradox that a personal practice would create a community. It doesn't seem naturally following from what we do by ourselves, you know, in our room with our eyes closed maybe. So we talked about education, that people need to understand a little bit more about what mindfulness is and step beyond the popular culture view of it as a way of just, you know, creating some kind of blissful happiness, and realize that it works because it helps people to connect. That we can think of it not just as a way of managing stress, but as a way of learning, and in particular learning to communicate, learning to feel compassion, and learning to be in community with others. And then we talked about the way that it's really hard to change a system, especially a system that's as big as Penn. And even if, you know, everybody in the administration and the deans and so on say, you're going to be mindful, we're going to do this, this is a year of mindfulness, actually nothing's going to happen. That it happens because an individual person makes a personal decision to make a difference. And the truth of it is that community doesn't really exist as a thing. It's an organic, unfolding process rather than an object that you can build or change. And that if we change the part of the community that we can actually get our hands around, which is us personally, then we've changed the community. And because we're people, and because we're porous to one another, and what we do within ourselves affects everybody who we come into contact with, maybe that's a way to make change really happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Great. So just to wrap up very quickly, well-being is by everyone and for everyone forever. This isn't just something that is for a small group of people. As long as you're a human being, well-being is something that is important for you in your life. And so it's important for us as individuals and as part of a community. And so there is, as you know, a campaign for wellness, and I've been asked to sit on the advisory committee for that campaign, so we'll be able to take the ideas that you've come up with and make sure that they get passed along. Provost Pritchett is the chair of that committee. We as a Positive Psychology Center want to continue to be involved, collaborating, partnering with you and the rest of the folks on campus as we move forward toward imagining and realizing a community that is more reversible Cape, and especially emphasizing the green side of the Cape. I am so enormously grateful to the Faculty Senate for having created this teach-in this week and allowing us to have this session in particular. And we're so fortunate to have Santosh Venkatesh, who is the chair of the Faculty Senate. So thank you, Santosh, for this opportunity to connect. And finally, thank you to our speakers, and thank you to you for coming and caring enough about well-being, your own and the well-being of the entire Penn community. This is the end of this session, but I hope it's the beginning of the continuation of our conversations and our working together to help make Penn and the larger world one where there's more flourishing, and we can make sure that we're using both sides of the reversible cape, in particular that we're using in full measure the green side of our capes. So thank you so much, be well, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.